Festive Study Hall. This is SAT Writing Modifiers. This is studyhall.testive.com. We run it every Monday, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. I'm the real Tom Rose. I'm the co-founder of Testive. I'm a professional teacher, and I'm also a professional writer. So I'll be sharing some of my modifier tips with you today, which have gotten me through the SAT and a bunch of the writing jobs that I've had over the course of my life. Let's just jump right into modifiers. So first of all, modifiers are 10% of all writing questions, so it's a really important category. Also, long noun modifiers, which you'll see later are the type of modifiers that we're really going to care about and pay attention to on the SAT. They often sound terrible, even when they're used correctly. And what does that mean for you? Well, it means it's really dangerous, especially if you want an upper level SAT score, because some of those high difficulty questions, which sound really bad, but are actually correct, you will need to understand modifiers in order to parse those correctly. So how do you get better at modifiers? Suppose you just want to improve yourself overall. How do you pull the trigger on that? 1, know the difference between noun modifiers and verb modifiers. That's a critical issue. 2, check for noun modifier adjacency, and we'll talk more about what that means in a bit. And finally, correctly conjugate verb modifiers. Right? So basically, know the difference between a noun and verb, know the rules for nouns, know the rules for verbs. First, let's take a look at an example of some modifiers. I love this sentence because it has all the modifier issues that you care about packed into this one compact little sentence. Dave ran to the big yellow house at the end of the street quickly. What in there is a modifier? Okay, I'm seeing in the chat window people saying big and yellow. Those are modifiers. Also, quickly is a modifier. What else? All right, Tanya, yes, at the end of the street. That is also a modifier. So let's go through and figure out what these things are modifying. So big and yellow, what are those words modifying? House. Yeah, big and yellow are modifying the word house. And what about quickly? What is quickly modifying? Quickly is modifying how Dave ran. It's telling us about how Dave ran. And then at the end of the street, what is that modifying? Also house, right? So some of these, big and yellow, for example, those words are modifying the noun house. And because it's a noun, we're going to call those noun modifiers. Quickly is modifying the verb ran, so we're going to call it a verb modifier. At the end of the street, this whole phrase, in quotes here, that whole phrase is modifying the noun house, so this whole phrase we're going to call a single noun modifier. Now, quick little aside here is where you're going to find these things. So type of modifier, noun modifiers tend to modify nouns. We already covered that. And what do we call these when it's just a single word? So the word yellow and the word big, those were adjectives. And if you're dealing with verb modifiers and they modify verbs, and if it's a single word, we call it an adverb. But what about that phrase, at the end of the street? So at the end of the street, that phrase doesn't really have a single name because it's not one word, it's actually a phrase. So that's what gives rise to the term noun modifier. So noun modifier, think of it as just a bigger bucket which holds all the adjectives in your world, which you already know about. And it also holds things that act like adjectives, but are actually whole phrases. So we're going to use the term noun modifier, which is a more general term, but it includes things like adjectives. So, you guys are familiar with adjectives and you're familiar with verbs and adverbs. So what's all the hubbub? Why does this matter? How does the SAT make this difficult? Well, adjectives are typically easy to identify because they're single words, but the relevant noun modifiers on the SAT will typically be phrases. So that phrase, at the end of the street, you're going to need to be able to find and identify those, and that's going to be a critical issue on the test. So let me give you some examples. of other phrases. For example, here's the one you already know, an adjective. He was riding a hideous camel. Hideous is your noun modifier. And in each one of these, tell me what we're modifying. So what is hideous modifying? Camel, exactly. Now check out this prepositional phrase. I do not like the was it in the closet. What is in the closet modifying? The was it, exactly. Also, present participles. Eating glass and nails, the street performer showed his toughness. What is eating glass and nails modifying? Oh no, somebody's asking Tao, no, what's a was it? It's from a Dr. Seuss book. The street performer, exactly. Nouns. Gary the Moyle performed his work with care and precision. What is the Moyle modifying? Gary. Perfect. And there are many, many other forms as well. So noun modifier examples go on and on and on and on. And part of my point here is to show you that noun modifiers can take many different forms. So I like to use a test to determine whether something's a modifier, which is, does it answer the question, which noun? So take the noun in question, and if something answers the question, which that thing, then it is a modifier. I'll show you. So in this first example, if somebody says, which camel? Oh, we're talking about the hideous camel. Because hideous answers the question, which camel are we talking about? That's a modifier. Which was it? The was it in the closet. Which street performer? The street performer eating glass and nails. Which Gary are we talking about? Oh, Gary the Moyle. Right, all these answer the question, which noun? So those are examples of modifiers. And you can use this technique when you're reading any sentence, really. If you have information in the sentence which is telling you about a noun, then that is a noun modifier. Another little trick you could use if you're having trouble spotting these is use the commas. Right? So for many noun modifying phrases, there is a comma separating the modifier from its nouns. So here's the sentence we had before, Gary the Moyle. Notice the commas surrounding that. Or eating glass and nails, comma, the street performer showed his toughness. These commas help you distinguish. Yeah, that isn't a positive. Very good. You don't need to know what a positive means, but this is one. Suffice to say, it's a type of noun modifier. It's okay to stop at the level of knowledge of what a noun modifier is, for the SAT anyway. So where are modifiers found? We're, of course, talking about not just noun modifiers, but verb modifiers today. And when it comes to noun modifier errors, you will tend to find those in sentence improvement questions. Sentence improvement questions are the type of question on the SAT where you have an underlined portion, and you have 5 options to substitute for the underlined portion. Verb modifier errors will be found in identifying sentence errors. These are the types of questions where you have a single sentence and 5 different portions of it have errors, or potentially have errors, and you pick which one has the true error. So they tend to be segregated nicely, which is convenient, because when you're doing those big, long questions, you can hunt for noun modifiers. When you're doing the short ones, you can search for verb modifiers. Scott, I missed your question. Oh, Scott is saying, why is it not by eating glass and nails? That's a good question, Scott. Interesting question. So if we add the by, that's a really, really good one, Scott. So suppose I add a by in there. So first of all, both sentences are correct grammatically. Scott is saying, what if we change this to, instead of eating glass and nails, the street performer showed his toughness, we change it to, by eating glass and nails, the street performer showed his toughness. Great, great question. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. So eating glass and nails is a modifier for what? The street performer. Yep. Let's see if I can. Right, so as written, we have a modifier for the street performer. And I'll just put all of this as a block noun, right? Now, if I said by eating glass and nails, the street performer showed his toughness. What is by eating glass and nails modifying? It's actually modifying. I'm getting a lot of people saying toughness. Well, actually, I'm going to show you later how toughness can't be the answer. But Alexina, I think, has it, which is it's, and so as Asim, it is actually modifying showed. Right? It's answering the question, how did he show his toughness? He showed it by eating glass and nails. Really interesting question. Really, really interesting question. So is the meaning of it is almost identical, right? So this does not create a strong meaning change, but functionally that is changing the nature of what that modifier is doing. And so that's a really good question. Okay, so let's talk about a modifier process that you can use to tackle these. First, you want to spot a noun modifying phrase or an adverb if we're dealing with the verbs. Right? We talked about some processes for doing that already with the commas. 2, find the noun or verb that it modifies. And 3, evaluate for adjacency in the case of nouns or conjugation in the case of verbs. Now, when I say adjacency, what I mean is the modifier next to the thing that it modifies, which is what we're going to learn a rule for this in just a moment. But that is the rule for modifiers. Noun modifiers must be adjacent to the noun they modify. So let me give you some examples. What's wrong with this sentence here? Rolling down the hill, Squiggly was frightened that the rocks would land on the campsite. Grace, that's very excellent. What Grace is saying, the rocks should be after the comma. And what Grace is saying in there is that rolling down the hill, which is our modifier, that's your modifier, should be modifying the thing that's immediately adjacent to it. In this case, that's Squiggly, but that's a problem. What should be rolling down the hill? It actually should be rocks. So here's a fix. Rolling down the hill, the rocks threatened the campsite and frightened Squiggly. And here's the rule that makes this so. Noun modifiers must be adjacent to the noun they modify. Right? So how do we know this is a modifier? Well, it answers the question, which rocks? Right? Which rocks? The rocks rolling down the hill. So that's a modifier. And if it's a modifier, it must be adjacent to the noun it modifies. It's trying to modify the word rocks, so it needs to be adjacent to rocks. And that's what we have here in the corrected version. We have rolling down the hill, the rocks. Darsh is asking, shouldn't Squiggly be capitalized? I think probably it should. I got this from Grammar Girl, so you can go blame her. Unless she capitalized it on her site, in which case you can come back and blame me again. Okay. What about this sentence? Coming out of the store, Dave's wallet was missing. Yeah, it sounds like Dave's wallet was coming out of the store. And why does it sound like that? What's the modifier? There's a noun modifying phrase in here. Coming out of the store, yeah. Coming out of the store, Dave, and then this whole thing is, composite noun, Dave's wallet. So who do we want to say is coming out of the store? We want to say Dave's coming out of the store, right? So this should be coming out of the store. Dave noticed that his wallet was missing. So this, up here it was wrong because Dave's wallet's not coming out of the store. What's coming out of the store? Dave. So this is correct now. This is a corollary to that first rule, which is the intended target of a noun modifier must actually exist. Right, so if you'll notice, the intended target of this coming out of the store, in the case of the first example, doesn't even exist. Right, we want to say Dave, but Dave's not in the sentence. All we have is actually Dave's wallet. So Dave's not even in the sentence yet, and we're already trying to make a modifier for him. So this is really the same rule, which is the noun modifier must modify the noun that it's adjacent to. And if it doesn't exist, that's of course wrong. So let's try some slightly different ones. The house was built really quick. Yeah, this should be quickly. There's a ly missing here. And what is this? What is this word quickly? What is it modifying? Built. What part of speech is built? It's a verb. The house was built really quickly. And if we're modifying a verb, then what we want is an adverb. Typically speaking, adverbs are conjugated with an ly. So make sure that you're using an adverb to modify verbs. Most adverbs end in ly, not all of them. In the cases that they don't, you just have to know. Does really modify quickly? Yes, it does. Ariel's saying, what if you took away really? That's fine, Ariel, if we took that away. It doesn't damage the sentence. So let's say we got rid of this word, and then it would be the house was built quickly, which would be okay. Are you asking about the first one? What if we got rid of the really up here? The house was built quick? That would still be wrong. So the presence or absence of the word really doesn't change whether the adverb is conjugated properly. Right, so those are the rules. So it's not, one of the great things about modifiers is not a tremendous amount of rules. So don't type your, for these questions, go ahead and answer them and type your answer into the chat window, but don't send it. So don't press enter. We've got a lot of people here today, so we don't want too many spoilers. All right, go ahead and send in your answers. And what here, so the consensus is answer choice C, although we have some pointing on B, some people advocating B as well. What in C would you like to change? Yeah, instead of noticeable, it should be noticeably. And what is this modifying? So how would we figure that out? So we've noticed a modifier. What should it modify? It should modify risen. What part of speech is risen? Or you might say has risen, I guess is the complete verb. It's a verb. And how has it risen? It has risen noticeably. So if we're modifying a verb, we should use an adverb. The adverb form of noticeable is noticeably. So this verb be, has risen, is used correctly. And so this would be an example of a verb issue. But in this case, there is no problem. We'll cover verbs in a future week. All right, here's another one. Again, type your answer into the chat, but don't send it. All right, go ahead and send your answers. All right. So now what is the modifier? What's the modifying phrase that you found that we really should be evaluating? So it's not just crisp and clean, right? So crisp, well, what do crisp and clean modify? They both modify uniform. Does anybody see a problem here? What appears to be a problem? The word crisp is not adjacent to the word uniform. Doesn't that make it wrong? For now, just look at this one little part, crisp, clean, uniform. Why isn't that wrong? Yeah, it's okay. This is a little bit of an exception. With noun modifiers, it's okay to stack them up. So you can say the big, bad, ugly, gray, cheap car. And all of those modifiers modify car, and that's okay. So modifiers have to be adjacent to the noun they modify or stacked on top of other noun modifiers for that same noun. Dashes are fine too, yeah. So let's say this still counts as adjacent. Adjacent has to be immediate, but it's okay to be adjacent to another noun modifier for that same noun. They're like Legos, they can kind of stack. So that's okay. So then let's expand out. What's another noun modifier? Perhaps something a little bit bigger. Look for, remember, we care about phrases. So try to stay away from just one word. Look for a phrase. Nice work, Ven. Dressed in a crisp, clean uniform. How about that? And so a bunch of you are noting a whole bunch of modifiers, and all of you are right. So crisp and clean, those are modifiers. Dressed in a big, clean, crisp, clean uniform, that's also a modifier. If the word efficient is also a modifier. And what you need to do is in each of these cases, figure out what it's modifying, and we're looking for something that's used incorrectly. So that's how we're picking it out. So if you're wondering, how is it we were possibly able to pick out this one? Well, we weren't, right? We looked at all of the modifiers, and this is the one that has a problem. Right, so what should be dressed in a crisp, clean uniform? What's the author's intent? The tour guide, yeah. So what we would want it to say is dressed in a crisp, clean uniform, the tour guide did something or other. That would be a correctly conjugated sentence with an opening modifier. So do we have that in A? No. We have dressed in a crisp, clean uniform, it. We don't know what that is. In B, we have dressed in a crisp, clean uniform, the efficient manner of the tour guide. Nope. C, dressed in a crisp, clean uniform, that reflected the efficient manner of the tour guide. So there's no comma here, so this really isn't a modifier. It's now a huge modifier. Dressed in a crisp, clean uniform that reflected the efficient manner of the tour guide. As she distributed maps for a walking tour of central Canberra, this whole thing is a big modifier that actually never has anything after it. Right? You'd almost want a comma after the period here. Dressed in a crisp, clean uniform, dressed in a crisp, clean uniform that reflected the efficient manner of the tour guide as he distributed maps for a walking tour of central Canberra. The tour guide did something or other, is how that sentence would go. I know it's a mouthful. But so we don't have comma and then the tour guide. What about D and E? D and E actually just sidestep the whole issue entirely. Instead of a modifier, it actually changes the crisp, clean uniform into the subject of the sentence. It's the crisp, clean uniform of the tour guide reflected, so that's subject and verb. Right? Here's your subject, and here's your verb. So there's actually, we changed the whole layout of the sentence. And that's the correct answer. E has a subject-verb problem. The crisp, clean uniform of the tour guide, and then it says a reflection. It should say reflected. So you could call that the same problem as C, which is it actually has no subject. Okay. Nice work there. If you have questions about how any of these are being eliminated, please let me know in the chat window so I can address it if I missed it. What difficulty was that? I'll look it up and I'll tell you in the chat window. It's section 6, question 7. Okay, go ahead and send your answers in. Somebody's asking what's the source. The source on this is the official SAT study guide, and the citation is down here at the bottom, right here. So if you ever want to look these up, this is Blue Book, 2nd edition, test 1, section 6, question number 14. 2nd edition. So guide 2. All right, so that was a difficulty level 2, that last one. All right, here we go. So we got a bunch of A's coming in. So what is the, this is almost kind of a reverse modifier. We have surprisingly badly. So the author's implying that this badly modified what? What is it doing badly? It's smelling. So what is that saying? When you say, oh, this casserole is smelling badly, what does that mean? What is the literal meaning of that? What it means is that, yeah, it means it was bad at smelling. What it's saying is the casserole has a nose, and that casserole is in some kind of smelling competition. And in the smelling competition, the casserole is smelling very badly, is kind of what we're saying here. What do we want to say? How does the casserole smell? The casserole smelled bad. And what part of speech is the word bad? That's an adjective. Yeah. So we want to say the casserole smelled bad. We want an adjective here, and we have an adverb. So I call this like a reverse modifier, which is it's written as if it's a modifier. But what I want you to feel comfortable with is saying this is actually not a modifier. What we want here is actually an adjective. What we want here is a noun modifier, not a verb modifier. So I put that a little confusingly at first. We want to say that it smells bad, not that it's bad at smelling. which is what you would be saying if you used a verb modifier. So the answer here is A. So I'll circle A to say that badly is incorrect. This should be smelling bad. All right, let's do one more. Okay, go ahead and send your answers in. And these should not be capitalized. All of these should be lowercase. All right, carried by the strong, dry wind of the stratosphere. What should be carried by the strong, dry winds of the stratosphere? Dust. So we want the word dust to appear immediately after this opening modifier. And lucky for us, the opening modifier is not in the underlined portion. So we know the answer must have the word dust. Carried by the strong winds of the stratosphere, dust from the 1980 eruption. So we can get rid of anything that doesn't have the dust immediately next to it. This is the adjacency rule. The only question left now is, do we need the word that? This is another modifier issue, actually. So what is the word crossed? Crossed is what we want to be our, let me kind of zoom through this a little bit because it's not the main modifier issue. Crossed here is the main verb of this sentence. The dust from the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens crossed the United States in 3 days. So that's the verb that goes with dust. Dust crossed is the subject verb of this sentence. If we use answer choice D, it says dust that crossed the United States in 3 days and circled the globe in 2 weeks actually makes everything that comes after the that into a giant modifier. It's answering the question, which dust? Which dust? The dust that crossed the United States in 3 days and circled the globe in 2 weeks. So what we actually have is another modifier for dust, which is not what we want. Yeah, we end up with double modifiers, and there's actually no verb. One of the only ways you can make a sentence super wrong is to not have a verb in it. What level is this question? This is test 1, section 10, question 5, which makes it a 3. This is a level 3 out of 5. Don't worry too much about the difficulty here, right? So like we're looking at questions on a topic by topic basis. So the difficulty for you really relates to whether or not you know the concept, right? They score difficulty in the test on a holistic level, which is out of all questions, how difficult it was. What you should be worried about is, if I know modifiers, should I get the question right? And the answer is yes, you should. So if you're getting it wrong, why that's important is because it's indicative of you needing to brush up on modifiers. And then don't worry about so much how difficult it was on the test as a whole. All right, so you can get further practice at www.testive.com. We have free questions up there, and or you can work with a 99 percentile scoring coach. I want to acknowledge a bunch of people that helped put together all the materials for this presentation. Miro Kazakov, Jackson Havid Noel, Janet the Machine Helperson, David Pikachu Chippendale, Lee the Chemist Akamondo, Shonak Coffee is for Closers Patel, Morella Brazil Crespi, David Chubby Shorts High Song, Charles Kitten Smuggler Reese, Abby the St. Engelstead, Will the Institute Eaton, Meg Smiles Butler, Samantha Swood Wood, Sophie Letcher Freak Flag Fly Heller, and John the Loya LaPlante. Thank you all for coming. This has been studyhall.testive.com. We run it Mondays, 9 p.m., 6 p.m. Pacific. Would you like a coach? If so, you can get a free 30-minute session with one at scheduler.testive.com.